Welcome to our session with our featured speaker, Dulce Garcia. My name is Stephanie Kern, and I'm a librarian at the San Diego County Library. And I, along with another member of the Creando Enlaces committee, Mayra Turchiano of the Carlsbad City Library, who is Carlsbad's community outreach supervisor, will be moderating a conversation with our featured speaker, Dulce Garcia, who is an attorney and an executive director of the nonprofit Border Angels. Before we get started, we'd just like to remind you all that during this session, we will be speaking in one language only to assist the interpreters providing the translation. Please click on the globe symbol and the closed caption icon at the bottom of your screen to select the English or Spanish audio channel and then press start. Before we get started with our conversation, Dulce, I understand that you would like to show us some photos and talk a bit about your work with Border Angels, which is an organization that advocates for human rights, humane immigration reform, and social justice.
Yes, thank you, first of all, for this invitation. I do want to say I did grow up in Logan Heights, and I know that this is how the conference, where it began. And so this, talk about full circle, I'm really excited about this space. So first of all, thank you. And as far as the work that we do, it's very much work that is necessary, and we have added on to the programs because of as a direct result of all of the policies coming from Washington, D.C., far removed from the reality in our border region. Some of these policies began during the Trump administration with the purpose of dehumanizing our immigrant community, and it created a humanitarian crisis. Some of these policies are so inhumane that it would deter people from asking for asylum. And one of those policies is still being felt today, and that's Title 42, where families, women, children are waiting in Tijuana, some for over a year and a half, to be able to present themselves at the port of entry to then ask for asylum and be let into the United States to then have their story heard by an immigration judge. These policies have resulted in deaths. That is a direct consequence of this policy, Title 42, where it shut down the border. And with the excuse of protecting Americans in the U.S., told immigrants that they have to wait in Tijuana, in particular, the region where we work, and wait for when the pandemic is more controlled. The reality is that this started way back in March 2020, and here we are 2022 and still being implemented during the Biden administration, while in San Diego County, the vast majority of people have been vaccinated and there are testing facilities available. And in Tijuana, in the 17 shelters that Border Angels supports, the overwhelming majority of migrants have also been vaccinated, and they are testing folks as they are being processed into the United States slowly in the recent weeks. So during the last 2 years, as people have been told you can't come into the US to make your claim, asylum seekers have become very desperate in Tijuana and have attempted to cross through the desert. And more recently, Border Patrol has confirmed they tried to cross, an increased number of people are trying to cross through the ocean, which has also resulted in death. So some of the programs that we have address these issues that have been exacerbated in the last few years. And then, as an example, our Volviendo a Casa program, Returning Home program, has opened this year because we received calls from families saying their loved one passed away as they attempted to cross through the desert. And some passed away as they attempted to cross through the ocean. The journey for folks to come into the United States has been increasingly more difficult and more costly. And again, this is a direct result of our policies and the hateful and disinformed narrative that is in conversation that is happening in DC even today. As folks have, immigrants have been told that they can't come into the United States to make their claim to asylum, We have seen the border open for Americans to go into Baja California throughout the entire pandemic, oftentimes even unmasked and unvaccinated. The border has been open for commerce. And in December of last year, Mayorkas was here in town celebrating the fact that more people were getting vaccinated, and therefore the doors were opening for visitors. So folks from Tijuana can come shop here in San Diego, they can come visit in San Diego and then return back to Tijuana with no issues. Yet asylum seekers are being told that they can't come into the US because we need to protect Americans from the pandemic. And not only have visitors been allowed into the US, but when Ukrainians showed at our border, within a matter of weeks, 10,000 Ukrainians were processed into the US, while asylum seekers from Haiti, from Central America, Mexicans remain in Tijuana. More recently, Border Angels has been able to negotiate with CBP, that's Customs Border Protection, the entrance of some migrants into the US. And excuse me, and we started to present folks 10 people at a time on April 21st. And since then, we've been able to process 800 migrants. We're up to 35 people per day. So Border Angels has been selecting folks from the 17 shelters that we support in Tijuana and presenting 35 people a day for them to be able to come into the US. So what I want to show folks today is some of the impact that we have actually provided testimony for in court in the last year. Let's see if I'm able to share my screen here. Okay. This camp started to form last year when Biden announced that it was going to be ending a program called Remain in Mexico, also known as MPP, where migrants that show up the port of entry are told that their case will be open, but they have to wait the duration of their immigration case while it's pending in the US courts. They have to wait outside in Mexico. When Biden said that program is horrible, it started during the Trump administration with, again, the purpose of deterring people from coming to the border. When Biden announced that he was going to end that program, people started to camp right at the port of entry. This is right at the San Isidro port of entry, very visible and quite honestly embarrassing for both the US and Mexican government that this started to happen, because people started to arrive with the hopes that they were going to be processed into the US and finally have their claim to asylum heard. Instead, they were told that because of Title 42, because of the pandemic, they have to wait outside in Mexico, even if MPP ends. So we started to see this encampment formed where in the summer at the peak, there were 3,500 people, over 700 children in this space, living in these conditions where we had to provide tents, blankets, food. They were all lacking medical care. They had no security of food, and all of them with the hopes of coming into the United States. While in the conversation in DC was about whether to lift Title 42, and that conversation was occurring every 60 days, every 45 days, migrants would hear Title 42 might end. They are going to reassess in 30 days or 45 days or 60 days. And like that, time went by, and short of a year, these folks slept in these conditions. There were no bathrooms initially for about a month until Border Angels showed up and we rented some private bathrooms for them. The Mexican government, after much embarrassment, put these bathrooms there, but they were not serviced. So they would service them maybe a week later, every week, but we're talking about 3,500 people in this space using these portable bathrooms. It wasn't enough maintenance. So we had reports of children getting sick in this space, women getting sick in this space, and again, without access to medical attention. Course of the last 2 years, we have received reports from people in the shelters, parents that tell us that the entire time that they've been waiting in these spaces, their children have not gone to school. So the children have been without education and without proper nutrition. Again, all of the shelters in the last 2 years during the pandemic, when they've needed the support the most, the support was there the least, because volunteers that would normally come from San Diego stopped going to San Diego to take donations to the shelters. And so during the pandemic, the shelters really struggled with keeping their spaces as safe as possible and maintaining the pandemic under control as much as possible in their spaces. This happened short of a year of the camp forming, where all 3 levels of government in the Mexican side forced folks from the encampment. They showed up around 4:30 in the morning in the darkness to displace all of these folks. And we have reports of people that said while they were on their way to work, they heard that their spaces were being torn apart, and some of them had documents that were needed for their asylum claims, including identification documents, being destroyed while they were on their way to work. And some, of course, having children, were pretty traumatized by this experience, where you saw police and guards come over to displace you with tactical gear. Very intimidating, especially for folks that are fleeing from their own government. When we talk about asylum seekers, we're talking about folks that are coming to Tijuana because they're fleeing something horrible, right? They're not coming over to visit. They're coming over because something violent usually happened to them in their home countries. It could be from their own partners, their domestic partners. It could be from cartels for folks that are displaced within interior Mexico, or fleeing from gangs. So this is just some of the work that we've been involved in the last year with the encampment, with the 17 shelters reporting to us today that they are still not receiving enough support. We do have to acknowledge the fact that the Mexican government has agreed with the US to collaborate with the program Remaining Mexico. So even if Title 42 were to end, and that is scheduled to end Monday, but tied in litigation today, even if Title 42 were to be lifted, folks are asking in Tijuana, well, how is that going to relate with the other policy of Remaining Mexico? And the fact is that the Mexican government was our last line of defense. If the Mexican government had said, we are not going to allow Remaining Mexico to continue, we're not going to receive migrants in the Mexican side of the border, then the Biden administration would have had no way to implement Remaining Mexico. Instead, what the US did is offered money to the Mexican government that was supposed to be going to the shelters to alleviate some of the humanitarian crisis. That hasn't happened. If you were to ask any of the shelters in Tijuana, they will tell you they haven't received the support. That OIM has been the only organization that has received funding for transportation of migrants during this implementation of the program. So the Biden administration is being quite disingenuous with the public by telling us that their hands are tied and they have to keep implementing these programs and that it's out of their hands. That is absolutely not true. The Biden administration was not ordered by the court to add Haitians to the Remaining Mexico program. So making it worse, right? They did not have to add Black migrants to this program, and the Biden administration chose to do so. And so with this, just to give more context to what we have seen in the border the last couple of years, the number of deaths for 2021 were 557 deaths for migrants crossing the border, the southern US-Mexico border. In 2020, it was less than half of that, 254. And again, more than twice the number of deaths of people that have actually been found. So they've been found by Border Patrol or reported to Border Patrol and categorized as a migrant. Many people perish in the desert and are never found or found years later. So these numbers are not accurate, but they give us an idea of the number of deaths that we're encountering. When it comes to maritime crossings, We don't know how many people have perished through the ocean, because when a Pangea boat that's supposed to hold eight people actually holds 15, 20 people, no one really speaks out. Survivors don't really like to talk about how many people were actually on the boat. And so we never really know how many boats have collapsed in the ocean and how many deaths have actually occurred in the last year from the increased maritime attempts. And we do get confirmation, though, from Border Patrol and Coast Guard that there has been an increased number of people trying to cross through the ocean. And that's as far as we have when it comes to data. But it is, again, a picture of the direct consequences of these policies, where folks are being told you have to keep waiting in Mexico, and they become so desperate that even with 5-year-olds, 2-year-olds, they try to cross through the desert. Through the work in the desert, we have seen signs that it's children that are crossing, and it's women that are crossing through the desert. Whereas before Trump and all of these attacks in our immigrant community occurred, normally you would see the single male individual from Mexico. Now we see that families are crossing through the desert, and it's not just from Mexico, but from Central America and Haiti. So that has also changed in the last couple of years. We, along with supporting the 17 shelters and the new program Volviendo a Casa, we also have our bond program, because even with this administration, what we're seeing is that asylum seekers are being put in a detention center and asked for thousands of dollars for their release. And so imagine you come from Cameroon, you make your way through Brazil, you survive the southern Mexican border, and you come to our border here. Then you turn yourself over to the US government, and they put you in a detention center, and they tell you have to pay $5,000 to get out of the detention center. Who has $5,000 in this economy today, right? Much less so an asylum seeker coming from another continent trying to survive. And that has happened to many of our clients. We have posted our 110th bond recently. So we have supported 110 families to get out of the immigration detention center. And they tell us very similar stories. They have nothing literally on their back when they show at a port of entry asking for support. Some of them have seen their spouses killed in front of them, their children killed in front of them with visible signs of torture. And the US still puts them in detention centers. And so it has been our community effort to pool resources to get them out of these detention centers that are overseen by private corporations that are making money from multi-billion-dollar contracts to maintain these spaces. We have heard a number of reports of violations, in human rights violations and harassment in these detention centers, but those reports are given to ICE, and ICE is not accountable, and there's no oversight over ICE. So that is another system when we talk about our immigration system. The detention centers is it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that quite honestly needs to be dismantled. But I think I'm going to stop there, because I know we have some questions, because we can go all day long about the more recent policies that are still being felt at our border, including this building of the wall and some other programs that we have, including the Green Card for Kids program, because it's incredible that even with this Biden administration, we have 6-year-olds facing the possibility of deportation and having to explain their claim in front of an immigration judge. So we opened our Green Card for Kids program in the last 2 years to address this issue, where kids are being facing deportation, being told that they have to represent themselves in front of an immigration judge without being assigned an immigration attorney. And these children that are here in the custody and care of the county have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. So again, they have already endured a lot of trauma, and then they have over their head this idea that they may potentially have to go back to their home country, back to danger.
Thank you so much, Dulce, for being here with us. and for your labor. I wanted to get us started with a couple of questions about people who are living as undocumented in the United States. My first question is, what kind of day-to-day work can non-legal professionals, including library workers and library patrons, engage in to assist those who are living in the US without documentation? And as well, can you tell us about your experience of defending DACA at the Supreme Court in 2019?
Yes, I thank you for those questions. Again, I, I remember very vividly going to the library in Logan Heights, and especially growing up, I remember that community being very much underserved. And for those of us that are undocumented, not having the security, the protection from deportation meant that we had to overlook our shoulders constantly. And we were always vigilant about our surroundings. And my parents were very protective and shielded us from that reality as much as possible. And so we wouldn't have access to some of the public parks like Balboa Park because we would hear immigrations downtown. And so we wouldn't feel comfortable going near those spaces. And for me, the library, particularly the Logan Heights branch in San Diego County, was a safe space. And I remember signing up for, we had no computers in my house growing up because being undocumented meant, working under the table for my dad meant not having protections like all his colleagues and other workers. And so whenever he would get injured, we were oftentimes ending sleeping in his truck, homeless for some periods of time. And so, struggling financially. And I remember, using the two computers that they had at the local branch library and signing up and waiting for my turn. And it opened a whole new world to me. And that space, the library, having access to all those books that I wouldn't have had access to if it wasn't because of the public library. That's where the motivation to become an attorney was born, from those books that I had access to, especially John Grisham that the library had. So very aware that space, the library for our community, is very important. And so, offering a safe space is critical for our undocumented community, and especially during the Trump administration, when we heard that everyone that is undocumented should be afraid. The reality is that we were very much afraid. And these libraries were a meeting point for us where we would have know your right info sessions. As an attorney, I often presented at different libraries in our county to give information to our undocumented community members on how to stand up for yourself should ICE ever try to detain you or question you, or should they go knocking on your door. And so because we still today, 2022, experience where some of our community members, particularly the older ones, don't have access to online, we knew that we had to go where people are, meet them where they are. And that was at the public library, which became very critical space for organizing. So sometimes we didn't have space to organize as community members. And I remember particularly 2017, 2018, organizing in these spaces with other coalitions to stand up for ourselves. So it became an organizing space. And what I've seen also the public libraries do is offer spaces for workshops for citizenship classes. So for Spanish speakers or non-English speakers to learn English and prepare for the citizenship exams, which has been very critical for our community, because then we're talking about increasing the vote so that we can then have access to a more equal representation in our communities. The census work also became very critical in the last few years, and the libraries played a great part in that, and getting voting education out as well. And so the libraries in our community in particular are a space where folks know they can go and access information, including information on permits, right? Business permits. And that's something that we'll be doing more in the future is education and outreach for community members so they can have more access to business opportunities and become self-sufficient, especially for folks that are trying to have their street vending businesses. In our county in particular, this is a very controversial issue, and the folks that are involved in street vending currently are dependent on access to their permits. A lot of folks tell us that they don't know how to go about acquiring a seller's permit, registering their street vending business as an official business. And so that's going to be, the library is going to be another space where we will be engaging in that kind of outreach and education for our community members. So as far as the DACA goes, I think that is a great example of how powerful our movement is. So I'm a DACA recipient, which means that I have a work permit and I'm allowed to contribute to the system. But as an example, and I tell this to everyone that is in the retirement years, is you're welcome, because we pay onto the Social Security system without the ability to get a single dollar back from, because we're not legal permanent residents and we're not US citizens. And so that is the fight we are on right now for a path to citizenship. We are protected from deportation, but the program was very limited in age and in the requirements. So to give you an example, I came into the US at the age of 4 in 1987 with my family. And I remember holding my older brother's hand while we crossed, and he was left out of the DACA program, even though he was also a child. And the DACA program it was announced in June 15, 2012, and it was meant to be a temporary fix for the movement at the moment. The movement was asking for a path to citizenship, and it was supposed to be bigger than just the folks that ended up receiving protection under the DACA program. So we're a few weeks away from celebrating the 10th year anniversary of the DACA program. But the reality is that we didn't want to be in this space today. What we wanted was a path to citizenship, and we wanted to include our parents, and we wanted to include everybody else that was left out of the DACA program. So it's like a moment of celebration because we still have DACA, we're still protected, but at the same time, it's a bittersweet moment because we left so many people behind that we were hoping to include today. And we were hoping to have one already a path to citizenship. So it's not over yet. But when Trump announced that it was going to be ending DACA, one of the first things we did was we came together and figure out a way to protect the program. And the way we did so was by suing. And so we sued the Trump administration. So if you were to Google Garcia v. Trump, you'll see I'm one of the folks that sued the president. And, you know, the idea of suing the most powerful, arguably the most powerful man on earth at that moment, and us being undocumented, was in itself a very powerful moment for our movement. And we won at the district level, and then we had success at the appellate level and took our case all the way to the Supreme Court. And that moment, going to the Supreme Court hearing, was also another moment to celebrate, because we had at the table an undocumented attorney, Luis Cortez, who was representing an undocumented attorney as a client in this space that was not designed for us. Right? The Supreme Court of the US was not designed to protect us, yet here we were taking over this space. And outside, you could hear the chants of people screaming, undocumented, unafraid, undocumented, unafraid. And you could hear the chanting from the bathroom of the Supreme Court. And it was such a beautiful moment because it had taken so many years to win DACA, and here we were defending DACA. And at that moment, we realized we had increased our collective power. We had allies from the corporate world that were backing us. We had over 100 attorneys involved in this litigation, hundreds of organizations, thousands of undocumented people. And in that rally outside at the steps of the Supreme Court, we even had undocumented parents with their children that had DACA. So very powerful moment in our movement, and an illustration of how much can be accomplished and how much power we have, whether the systems that are in place are meant to protect us or not. So very, very powerful moment for undocumented people that day. And sure enough, we received the ruling of the court in June the following year, saying that the DACA program was going to remain in place and that we would be protected. However, the great state of Texas decided to continue the litigation and continue to attack the DACA program. And so it is still in limbo, and we still don't have security and guarantee that we'll be here in the future. And so what we need is a path to citizenship to ensure that folks are able to stay here in the US and dream, especially for the younger folks that were waiting to enroll in DACA, that were left out because they were too young to enroll in DACA at the moment, have been waiting still to be able to get this protection. And so they come to me and they say, is there any news about this? Because I'm about to go to college and I don't know how to plan for the rest of my life, when I don't even know if I can have a work permit, a social security number, an identification document, financial aid. Like, how am I going to do college? And it's sad because that's the same position where I was in 2001 when I graduated from high school, and my counselor was telling me that because I was undocumented, I wasn't going to even enroll in community college. And today there are 17-year-olds hearing a very similar thing. And feels like instead of moving forward as a country in protecting our youth, we took some steps back in the recent years with this anti-immigrant narrative in our country. So it feels like we've had moments of celebration. At the same time, it's still an ongoing battle for human rights and protection for our community members.
Wow, well, thank you so much, Dulce, for all the work that you're doing. We are really grateful to you and your organization, and I know there's a lot more to be done, and I know folks are inspired, and we have shared your information, your organization's contact information, so if you wanted to support at this time, our time has come to an end with Dulce. Thank you so much, Dulce. We do appreciate you being here with us. We know you're very busy, and the work that you're doing, it's critical to the well-being of our communities. At this time, I ask all that to please join us at one of our other two feature presentations. And thank you once again for joining Creando and being here with us today.
Thank you.